a few minutes of daily vigorous physical activity, getting out of your comfort zone, maybe huffing and puffing a little bit, is a very effective health strategy. And look for ways to get uncomfortable once in a while throughout the day. Your body will thank you for it. Your mind will thank you for it. You'll be a lot happier and healthier 20, 30, 40 years from now.
So how do you define high intensity interval training?
Repeated bouts of hard work interspersed with recovery periods. Now, the key question is probably how do we define hard? I think people get this notion that, okay, the exercise is intermittent. I do something, I take a bit of a break, I go hard again. So how we define hard is it depends on the context. And so hopefully that's a freeing message for a lot of people, that you don't need to magically meet this single percentage of your maximum heart rate, however you would measure that. So let me break that down. In a health or an exercise prescription context, hard means vigorous, and vigorous is well defined in public health guidelines, in guidelines from various agencies. And so it's around 77% of your maximum heart rate. It's about a 7 or 8 on a 10-point scale. So if 10 is sprint from danger pace, save your child from an oncoming car, 1 is laying in bed. Moderate exercise is a 5 or a 6. Vigorous is a 7 or 8 on that scale. You couldn't have a conversation with your workout partner, but you could spit out a couple of words and phrases.
So squarely between the 70 and 80% of max heart rate, if you're wearing a wearable that tracks that.
Yeah, and on the upper end of that, as I say, that 80% guideline is pretty good. And so if people want to aim for that, but it's not the only one that they can measure, because of course lots of things can affect your heart rate. But on the higher end of that 70 to 80% would be, if you could think of it as the minimum effective dose of high intensity interval training.
And what's the minimum effective duration?
That would be the other key question. Work that we've done, and where the name of my book, The 1 Minute Workout, came from, was we've done studies looking at 3 20-second bursts of hard effort. Now, that doesn't mean just getting to that minimum vigorous pace. There, you're working much harder than that. And so effectively, when it comes to HIIT, there's an intensity duration trade-off. If you're willing and able to sprint or work very, very hard, you can get away with a surprisingly small dose of exercise and it can still be beneficial. Now, if you're the other end of that scale, you're just getting into the HIIT range, 77% or so, we're not going to suggest that you could do 3 20-second efforts like that, and it's going to provide you with robust health benefits. Of course, anything is better than nothing, but think of it as that intensity duration trade-off.
So, okay, I think you sold a lot of people on the 1 minute workout. Assume we're somewhat trained, because you don't want to encourage someone who's never done anything to get off the couch and try to go to 100% max heart rate. But assuming we are trained, tell me more. How can one have that 1 minute workout?
Yeah. So the classic studies that we did were 3 20-second bursts within a total time commitment of 10 minutes. So you can imagine.
Sold. Everyone's
you get
sold.
On your workout bike. Yeah. You warm up for 2 or 3 minutes. You do a 20-second sprint. Rest or recover for 2 minutes. Do a second sprint, another 2 minutes of recovery, do a third sprint, and a short cool down. So start to finish, 10 minutes. But within that 10 minutes, you've only done 1 minute of very hard work, these 3 20-second sprints. And what we've seen is the improvements that you can see over several months, the improvements in your VO2 max, the improvements in other health-related markers is very similar to what we associate with a much larger dose of the more traditional moderate intensity continuous training. So we're not saying that HIIT is the only way or it's the best, but it's an option for a lot of people, and especially those who cite time as a major barrier.
I'm like, who doesn't? It's always time and money, right? Those are the major barriers. And so How often? How many days per week do we need to do this?
Yeah. And so our classic studies have been 3 times a week. So the vast majority of HIIT studies are 3 times a week. I can confidently say here, if reasonably trained people would do that 3 by 20 workout 3 times a week, they're going to improve their VO2 max. They're going to improve their cardiorespiratory fitness. Now, there's no free lunch. That type of training is very demanding. It's extremely uncomfortable for a lot of people. Now, some people will say, you know what? That's okay. I'm willing to work very, very hard if I can get away with a very small amount of time. Other people try it and say, that sucked. I absolutely hate that workout. I'm never going to do that again. And so now what we're trying to do is say, okay, well, if it's not all out, how high do you have to get in order to make it beneficial? And so we've started to, do some work with what we call vigorous stair climbing. So people, ascend the stairs at a challenging pace. They're not sprinting up the stairs. It's not safe. And so that's where some of our research is going now, is sort of this idea of, okay, how hard do you have to work and how little a dose can still provide some benefits?
I love that question. And before we touch on benefits and VO2 max, I want to talk about something I struggle with, and it's RPE. So the rate of perceived exhaustion. And I think that's defined as this feeling like I can't go anymore. I'm out of breath. I'm done, versus heart rate zones 1 through 5, 5 being 90 to 100% of your max heart rate. And something I've personally found, and I'm not alone, is sometimes the two are not correlated. And so, for example, I don't run. I hate running. I joke, if I run, that means I'm being chased. Call the police. I'm in danger. So I row and I'll do the ski machine. And I'll find when I do the ski machine at my local gym, and if I go hard, I hit RPE fast, much faster than I would rowing, but my heart rate can't get to the 90 to 100%. I end up running out of steam at like zone 3 to 70, 80%. And I'm like gassed, I'm done. Whereas rowing, I can just hold zone 3, zone 4, and sometimes I just have trouble getting to zone 5 to like get winded, but I don't feel it. And so I just walk away confused. I say, here I am working my butt off on the ski machine and I run out of gas quickly and I'm at zone 3, whereas I can hold zone 3 or zone 4 rowing and I'm okay, and get to zone 5 and I just have trouble holding it, but it's not because of I'm running out of gas, so to speak. So I just left. I don't know what to do.
It's a classic conundrum. I feel your pain, and it's actually, to make a serious point, it's one of the things that makes the challenge of translating high intensity interval training, especially when you're working at these very high intensities, so difficult. And so, quick minor correction: it's rating of perceived exertion, RPE. So not rating of perceived exhaustion. And so those are different, but you can think of it as, it's basically how hard are you working, right? And a 10 on either, exhaustion, or effort. If you're working at a 10, you're working really hard. So in some ways it doesn't matter there, but that's what RPE is. And to your point, the higher the intensity, the greater the disconnect between that feeling of effort and your heart rate. So the heart rate response lags. And so there's a classic test in exercise physiology called the Wingate test. It's on a specialized bike. It's 30 seconds of all out, as hard as you can go effort. It's one of the most demanding tests you could imagine, where you're 10 minutes in and you're just gassed, you're dying on it. But at the end of the 30 seconds, you've worked extremely hard and you're just exhausted, but your heart rate might be 70% of maximum because of that lag. And so this is where I think RPE has value, especially when it comes to prescribing high intensity interval training, because we all have this subjective scale, and RPE is influenced by many different things. And so your relationship between your heart rate and perceived effort can differ depending on the day, Did you have a good sleep or not? Are you under a lot of stress? Did you drink last night? All of these things can affect your heart rate response to exercise. And so I think effort based training can be exceptionally valuable.
So what should we pay more attention to? The effort and the exhaustion or the zone? Or is it a little bit of both?
So I think the nice thing about using different metrics to define high intensity interval training is you can use the one that appeals to you most. So, for example, some people absolutely love wearables and their phone, and they wear a heart rate monitor religiously because they absolutely want that objective feedback. Where am I? I don't want to go too high. I don't want to go too low. Other people are like, but others can feel, well, I don't want to be a slave to that, right? I just want to go with how I'm feeling. And so, if I'm going for a run and my heart rate says you're getting into your highest zones, but you feel great, some people say, I just want to go for it. And so I think that's the way people should look at it is either metric can be an effective indicator of how hard you're working, and choose the one that works for you, or at least be okay to go out of your comfort zone once in a while in terms of whatever metric you like. Now, if you're an athlete, sometimes coaches are going to say, no, we do heart rate based training. Others are going to say, obviously, there's a lot of lactate based training now, but some people are fine to go with perceived effort. And so I like that idea of using different metrics, choose the one that works for you, and don't feel that HIIT is singularly defined by any single one of those.
Fair point. And if we assume that the 1 minute workout, if you will, 3 times a week, a total of 10 minutes is the minimum effective dose, when do we see diminished returns? What's too much for most people if they're just looking for longevity benefits?
Yeah, and these are where you don't like to have the guests on, especially the cautious scientists, who every answer is, well, it depends, right? And so, but it does depend a little bit, and probably the biggest reason why it depends is we're all so variable. So there's huge inter-individual variability in responses. I could take 100 of your listeners, put them on the exact same interval training program. Some are going to thrive, some are going to wither, some are going to really enjoy it, and some are going to burn out or overtrain very, very quickly. And so there isn't you'll read on the internet or read in the latest health magazine, well, if you're doing HIIT more than twice a week, it's too much. And others will say, you can do HIIT 5 times a week, it's fine. And so I think that's what it is we're all a little bit different. And so I think for an individual, there's a little bit of, you got to try it out a little bit and see what works for you, as unsatisfying an answer as that is. But generally speaking, we can see people do well with 3 times a week of interval training. That doesn't mean they have to do it. And, you've had some guests on recently. I listened to Andy Galvin's interview with you, and, I think you hit on some very good points there. Like, you got to push it once in a while, right? And so even touching into that HIIT zone once a week is fine. But ideally, you're also doing something that lasts an hour every week that's moderate. So the best approach is a variable one to try and hit on all of these areas. The other analogy that I'll use, it's a bit like the stock market, right? And so probably the best approach for most people is to invest in some boring mutual funds, or to spread out your risk. You might get rich with a single stock pick. You might find that singular workout that really just happens to work for you. But for most people, doing a variety of things is going to be best for them over the long term.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that point and mentioned Andy's interview, which I loved, but I also left with a lot more questions. And so I think you bring up a good point. If you're doing the traditional VO2 max workout, which is the once a week, and it is all out. In the interview with Andy, we described, the sprint. You sprint for a quarter mile, then walk, and then sprint and so forth for a mile. It's probably going to take you 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe a little less if you're a really seasoned athlete, but it's a lot of weight on one day. What if you have an off day? It's a time commitment that I think, well, let me take a step back. In terms of pounding on the body, there's going to be a lot more pounding, if you will, or exertion in that one day, because you're going for a longer period of time versus like this all out 1 minute. And you're doing it 3 days a week. You're kind of stepping into it. You're building a base, and at the same time building the peak. versus I'm just like going for the peak and I'm going hard once a week. And for a guy who's turning 50, who doesn't want to get injured, that scares me.
Yeah. Lots in there, but number one would be, you mentioned you're not a runner. I'm not a runner either anymore because I can't be. I'm the classic, mid-50s guy who has knee osteoarthritis, but I do a lot of HIIT, and I do a lot of HIIT on the bike. And there's minimal impact forces on the bike, or if you're using a rowing erg. So you can, depending on the mode of exercise, HIIT per se, or working hard, does not have to ramp up the potential risk for injury. Again, you hit on this with your interview with Andy. Running HIIT is extremely demanding, or running at VO2 max pace is extremely demanding and potentially injurious. But doing the same thing on the bike, you can have the same cardiovascular stress, but not the same stress on your joints in that. So that's point number one. Point number two, you're talking about the pyramid. There's lots of ways to build that pyramid, right? And so we'll often take cues from elite endurance athletes. And so I think that's where the classic 80-20 split or 80-20 mix that's often bantied around comes from. And that's, if you're a high level endurance athlete, they tend to center around training, which is 80% is low to moderate intensity, continuous type training, and 20% high intensity intervals. And it's a very popular and effective formula for enhancing performance. Now, where I would quibble with some of the other other commentators out there is, just because elite athletes do an 80-20 split, that doesn't mean that that's optimal for everyone. If you're training 25, 30 hours a week, 20% HIIT is a lot of HIIT. If you're training an hour a week, 20% high intensity intervals, it's not that much. So I think it depends, how much time are you wanting to invest in your physical activity and exercise pursuits? And importantly, what's your goals? Are you just looking to maintain health and general fitness? Are you trying to train for a 5K race or an important event? Are you trying to improve or just maintain? And so all of these things impact on what you, quote unquote, should be doing.
So let's say I'm training for longevity. I want to, feel good and look good as I age. And I'm limited on time. I work, maybe I have a family. How should I structure my week if I've got like maybe a half hour a day, and we're going to allocate, say, at least 2 to 3 days to strength training? Got a half hour a day. How can we allocate days specific to HIIT or zone 2, or just to say cardio in general? And how can I maybe layer it on to my resistance training?
Yeah. So I would suggest that doing more HIIT would provide more bang for your buck. And when you come back to that idea, your goal is longevity and general health. Again, you talked about this with Andy, but probably the single best predictor is your cardiorespiratory fitness, which you measure objectively as VO2 max. And so getting your VO2 max and maintaining it as high as you can over the course of your life is probably the best insurance that you have. There's no guarantees, but it's probably one of the best insurance markers that you're going to have a high likelihood of living long and living healthy. And I think especially when time is limited, there's good evidence to suggest that more intense, more vigorous exercise is going to provide greater bang for your buck in terms of improving your VO2 max, as well as things like improving your mitochondrial capacity and your metabolic health. So to answer your question, if you work out 30 minutes a day, 6 times a week, say, and 3 of those are allocated to resistance exercise, and 3 of those days then are going to be aerobic based, I would suggest that for 2 of those 3 days, do intermittent work. That doesn't mean you have to be sprinting, but get into that vigorous range. So do some alternating bouts, getting into that vigorous range for 10, 15, 20 minutes of those 30-minute periods. So vary up the rest intervals, vary up the recovery intervals, but get into that vigorous range as much as you're willing to do, because I think it will pay the greatest benefit. in terms of boosting your fitness in limited time?
Well, let me rephrase that. I should have asked the question a better way. I think we're all sold on your 1 minute workout. It's happening. And we're doing that 3 days a week. What I should have asked more specifically is, is it zone two? Is it some specific type of training, assuming we're doing this 3 day a week, that's going to benefit that 3 day a week VO2 max, ultra efficient HIIT workout? Is it a certain thing? Like, should we, for example, resistance training? I have no patience. I don't have time. I don't really wait between sets. So my heart rate is always like, I'm always at zone two at the gym. It's just happening. That, for example, or is it walking? Like, we're all sold. How can we use our time effectively to make sure we're getting extra benefits or extra gains, if you will, with your 1 minute workout?
I think the mode of exercise doesn't matter. So, if we're talking broadly aerobic exercise, the type of exercise that you do, it doesn't really matter. There's an old saying that your heart doesn't know what your muscles are doing. And so, again, an empowering message, right? So you don't have to run, you don't have to get on the bike, you don't have to do stairs, you don't have to do the elliptical, you don't have to do the rower. Pick one of those that you like, and you're more likely to stick with it over the long term. So if you're that person who, I only like the rower, okay, only do the rower. I like to vary it up. Okay, that's fine. Vary it up, right? So it's more about the relative effort than the specific exercise. Obviously, you have to do some resistance exercise in there, and body weight stuff is, or not recovering very much in between sets. That's fine. So I'm really not trying to hedge on the question, but I would say, ideally then, if you are sold on these 1 minute workouts, I think you want to do something, sometimes for a half hour, do it continuous in nature, for, try and maintain a high intensity for as long as you can. But it's absolutely okay to do the so-called zone 2 stuff. Again, the more vigorous workouts, the more perceptually challenging it is. And so it's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with doing moderate intensity, continuous work, whether that's, in the trails or walking your dog or walking with your partner. Like, that's all fine. So I just don't want my message here to be, hey, it's only about HIIT. HIIT is the greatest thing. It's the only thing that people should do. Traditional cardio sucks, and, scrap the public health guidelines. That is not the messaging that's going out today.
Jason Walkup here, founder and co-CEO of mindbodygreen and the host of the mindbodygreen podcast. Please subscribe. You'll never miss a show, and you won't regret it. Understood. On that note, I do want to double click on HIIT benefits, because there are many, and it goes beyond cardiovascular health and respiratory fitness, if you will. Can you walk through some of the benefits as they relate to longevity for HIIT, whether it's metabolic, flexibility, body comp, brain health? It's a long list. So I do want to talk about that.
And so, we've definitely done work in the area of metabolic health, or this idea of metabolic flexibility, which, that's just the idea. Whatever fuels you want to give to the body, it's able to utilize it, right? You want to give it fats, fine. It'll take the fats and burn them for energy. You want to give it carbohydrate, fine. It'll take those sugars and burn them for energy. So that's this idea of metabolic flexibility. And that's largely related to your mitochondrial capacity, your mitochondrial content. So mitochondria are these specialized organelles. They're referred to as the powerhouses of the cell. But what mitochondria do, mitochondria are the part of the cell that takes oxygen to burn sugars and fats to produce cellular energy in a very efficient manner. So they produce energy aerobically. And so HIIT is definitely a stimulus for your mitochondria to grow new, to grow more mitochondria, to remodel your mitochondria. So effectively, the mitochondrial health gets better. And that translates into better metabolic health. And that translates into better things like insulin sensitivity, which we know is largely related to your risk for developing type 2 diabetes. So if you have better insulin sensitivity, your risk for type 2 diabetes or prediabetes goes down. So, that's something that we've really been focused on. There's definitely good work out there. Again, the traditional approach can do it, but HIIT probably can do it in a little more time efficient nature. In terms of body composition, As you would well know, it's primarily about diet. Absolutely, exercise and HIIT specifically can assist with weight loss efforts and encourage weight management. But again, you'll read on the internet, oh, you do a HIIT workout, you have this massive afterburn effect, and the calories are just going to melt away. Absolutely not, right? Is there some time savings there with HIIT in terms of calorie burning? Yeah, probably, right? And so you can have a little greater afterburn, or your metabolism or your rate of calorie burning in recovery is a little higher for transiently longer period of time. And so if you do that repeatedly over time, that's gonna help you. But there's no compelling data right now, at least to my mind, that HIIT is magically better for weight loss or weight management. And of course, the primary driver there is nutrition. I think the whole area of brain health is fascinating. I'm not an expert on that, but definitely, we're watching this work around BDNF, potential relationships with lactate. Clearly, exercise generally is going to promote cognition, brain health, neurogenesis, things like that. And there's definitely some interesting studies. You can cherry pick a few right now to say a high intensity exercise is maybe better for that. But I think that work is still relatively at its infancy. And there's a lot more that we need to know around there. And probably there, just exercise and physical activity is good for brain health. Maybe there's some subtle differences, but I don't think there's as compelling a data right now as there is around, for example, cardiorespiratory fitness.
Intuitively on that one, and again, I caveat I don't like running, but running, I have run, and you can kind of zone out. It's meditative. Whereas with HIIT, there's intense focus, which intuitively feels a little bit better for cognition. This intense focus versus, kind of zoning out, running, enjoying life.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe one of the best activities you could do is orienteering, right? Whether it's winter or summer, which is that basically combines running, trail running with map reading, and the winner, gets to the goal or gets to the place fastest. But it's not just who can run there faster; it's who can figure out the map to get there. And there's been some work done here at McMaster. My colleague, Dr. Jennifer Heiss, she's a cognitive psychologist, but a student of hers, Emma Waddington, was an orienteer and did some really cool studies around that. So, that speaks to both sides, if you will, the physical health as well as the mental challenge.
Love Jennifer. I didn't put the two together. We had her on when her book came out, and her work in terms of mental health and the implications, unbelievable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so you mentioned stairs earlier. My view is stairs are so underrated. And if you think about time, very effective. If you think about that, I have a rule: under 5 flights, I'm taking the stairs. So if I got to wait for an elevator and maybe take the elevator up 5 flights, maybe the elevator comes at it's 5-10 seconds. Maybe I have to wait another 10 seconds. How long does it really take you, if you're in shape, to take 5 flights of stairs? Not much longer. So I'm like, bang for your buck. I'm doing stairs all day long.
I'm with you. I have the same rule in terms of taking the stairs. This feeds into some of the work that we're currently doing right now, which is the notion of exercise snacking. And so, what an exercise snack is an activity. It lasts less than a minute, but stair climbing is a perfect example, right? You're walking to the subway, you're walking to the bus, you're coming home to your apartment, you're walking into your office tower, and you got the option, right? You can take the elevator or you can take the stairs. Built-in exercise snack opportunity right there. The other classic example for me is getting off a long flight, right? You get off the plane and you have the option. You've just sat for 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. Of course, many people choose the escalator option, but there's a built-in exercise snack opportunity right there. If you have carry-on luggage, it turns into a strength exercise as well. Up the stairs, 20, 30 seconds, massively beneficial for your skeletal muscles and your cardiovascular capacity. And so if you can build those in through your day, you're setting yourself up well.
Yeah, I love exercise snacking. And if you think of the big objections to the health category, if you will, again, it's time and money. A lot of these exercise snacks don't cost anything and they're so efficient. It's this idea of editing your day versus adding and, oh, I got to get up early or "Oh, I don't have an hour." Because you know what? People don't, but you have these mini breaks. So let's talk more about this.
100%. And so I think, like there's definitely a pendulum with HIIT, right? And I've been in doing this research now for almost 20 years. And, I think there was a lot of promise with HIIT, even though a lot of the things that we were researching with HIIT, they weren't brand new concepts. Athletes have known this for a long time. HIIT as a health promoting activity has been advanced for decades, including high intensity interval training in patients with cardiovascular disease. It goes back to the 70s and 80s. But then there was a bit of a backlash, I think, against HIIT, in part because of overstatement. I'd like to think that we weren't, advancing all of that overstatement. But I think now it's starting to settle in. And related to that, then, I think was growing awareness of very small bursts of physical activity can be beneficial. Until recently, the public health guidelines stated that unless a bout of activity was 10 minutes or more in duration, basically it didn't count. And there wasn't a lot of evidence for that. But the most recent physical activity guidelines are now suggesting, hey, every little bit counts. In part, I think, because of the recognition of some of the HIIT research that's out there. I also think HIIT is beneficial because it's empowering the people who otherwise think, okay, exercise is this thing that I do in a special place after I change into special equipment, and it takes me an hour, and I don't have that. And so we can break down these barriers by saying, no, one, it's physical activity, right? It doesn't have to be structured exercise. Two, you don't have to change into anything. You can do it anywhere. Look for these activities of daily living that you can incorporate that are beneficial. And three, it doesn't take a lot of time. What do you got? 20 seconds, a minute? Okay, we'll take that.
You know, if you think about this, if you're a mom or a dad of a young kid and you've got a 30 pounder, if you're holding a 20 to 30 pounder in your arm and say like you're vacuuming and walking around the house, like you're essentially got your weighted vest on and your heart rate is up because you're moving your arms, you're vacuuming. And like there's so many ways to get creative here. And I do think that's empowering.
Absolutely, right? Ballroom dancing. People like to, people don't like to exercise, or they never think of themselves as an exerciser, but they love to dance, right? So there's so many ways. Again, basically it comes back to, what are we talking about? Physical activity, which is just moving your muscles and getting your heart rate up a little bit, getting a bit of a cardiovascular challenge.
So what else is underrated or if you will, that maybe something we're doing, which we don't realize can be classified as HIIT if maybe we added a little bit to it?
I'd say body weight exercise would be the classic one for me. And so you say body weight exercise, some people's minds go directly to burpees and they're like, I hate burpees. A lot of people hate burpees, but there's so many different things, ascending out of a chair, right? So I think those opportunities to engage in activity that doesn't require space, specialized equipment, anything else. And so for some people, again, they have bad memories of high school gym class, right? Push-ups were a punishment, right? Or in sports, if you played sports and you got into trouble or you weren't following the play or the drill, you were told to run sprints, right? And so I think people, there's some negative connotations there, but again, we got to flip the script. We're just talking about basic calisthenics, things that don't require much space, equipment, time, and all of these things can be beneficial. So, you mentioned playing with your children, ascending the stairs with a heavy backpack, carrying groceries out to your car. Park the car. Don't hunt around. Look, and these are not novel ideas. We hear these all the time, but they matter, right? Park in the farthest spot. Carry your groceries out to the car. Do it with a bit of a step in your walk. It's a built-in workout right there.
Talk while you walk.
For sure. Absolutely, right? And so people can look for these simple, easy ways to basically make their day a little bit more harder. right? Like look for ways to make your day harder, simple ways, because as a society, of course, we've done such a great job of engineering physical activity out of our lives.
So you said ascending out of a chair. How can we make that harder?
Yeah, so I, well, for a lot of people, first of all, even doing a series of air squats, like if you're going to do a series of, do air squats for 1 minute, right? A chair ascends for a minute. Challenging for some folks, right? Uh, do a wall sit for a minute, right?
Oh,
Where
that's
you're
great.
sitting
Oh,
against a wall. So, and again, I, not everyone loves these, right? So
it's bringing back bad memories for me from.
exactly, right? But how could you do it? You could hold a book close to your vest. You could hold your child, right? If you got that young baby in the sling, do a series of air squats there. Now, of course, be safe, make sure someone's around you. Don't choose to exercise with your child. I'm not suggesting that. Many different ways to add resistance. But I think the fundamental point here is there's just so many types of these activities, and we just hit on a number there that can be used and built in effectively. If you'll indulge me, let me give you one more stat, and that's I've been involved with some research. It's led by an individual named Emmanuel Stamatakis out of the University of Sydney. But it's this idea, I'm going to introduce another acronym here, VILPA. And what VILPA means is vigorous, intermittent, lifestyle, physical activity. And so it's basically HIIT that's not structured exercise. It's vigorous in nature, it's intermittent, but it's part of your lifestyle and it's physical activity, not structured exercise. So a lot of these things that we just talked about, carrying groceries, carrying a heavy shopping bag out to your car, those are examples of VILPA.
Well, I'll give a nod to my friend Dan Buettner, Blue Zones. It's very Blue Zones where these people are moving all day, and longevity is equated with in some communities is the incline in the neighborhood. Is there a hill?
And so the critical stat there that I wanted to drop in was I've been involved with some work led by Professor Stamatakis that's trying to quantify the amount of VILPA that's associated with improved health outcomes. And in one of the studies, it relied on data from what's known as the UK Biobank, where a large number of individuals are followed over a long period of time. But what that work showed was in individuals who did 3 to 4 minutes a day, 3 to 4 minutes a day of this type of activity, they had marked reductions, 25, 30% reduction in their risk of dying from all causes, in their risk of cardiovascular disease, mortality. And so it just is more compelling data that brief, vigorous, hard work can be very, very beneficial for your health.
And 3 to 4, essentially, that's walking up a very steep incline with groceries.
Exactly. And 3 to 4 minutes a day of that. The more you do, the better. But again, it's this idea. We're not suggesting that's all that people should do, but it's more evidence that brief, vigorous physical activity, as we've been talking about, can be very, very beneficial. And that's probably the big takeaway here for folks, hopefully.
And are there differences between men and women here?
Maybe. Again, the cautious scientist answer. And we've shown it in some of our studies. So for example, sometimes when we've done relatively small scale, but these are very carefully controlled and very invasive studies, we've seen some subtle differences between biological males and biological females in terms of some of their glucose responses. But I think it's more related to the large inter-individual differences in responsiveness. Because sometimes we've followed up those studies where we then try to more carefully control or match our groups of males and females in terms of their fitness levels and that. And we're not able to reproduce those findings. And so what that tells me is clearly males and females are not exactly the same. There might be some subtle biological differences, absolutely. But I think for a lot of these things, they're relatively subtle. Both men and women, males and females, can benefit from interval-based approaches to fitness. And I don't think right now we can definitely say this is an attenuated response in biological females compared to males.
Got it. In terms of studies, you mentioned the Vilpa study. Are there any others that come to mind that you're excited about or would love to do if you could wave a magic wand and get funding and
Yeah, so the exercise snacking stuff, that we're big on that right now, and so right now we're running a number of randomized clinical trials. These are multi-center, two-site right now clinical trials. This is with my collaborator, Dr. John Little at the University of British Columbia, looking at exercise snacks in various groups of individuals. So right now we're running a trial in individuals who have type 2 diabetes and asking the question, if they do 20 snacks a week, so that's 4 or 5 snacks, 4 or 5 days of the week, and all these snacks are 1 minute in duration. So at most, it's 20 minutes of vigorous exercise a week for 3 months. Is that enough to move the needle in things like their glycemic control? So these individuals are wearing continuous glucose monitors, and we're trying to ascertain that. We have some other work planned in individuals who have overweight and obesity, and so trying to really, you know, apply these concepts in the real world. And so all of these studies are not, people come into our laboratory under a very carefully controlled environment 3 or 4 times a week. People are doing this in their real lives. And so how the intervention is being delivered is it's on their smartphone. So we partnered with a company that has basically, they get a message, a reminder that says, hey, it's time for your exercise snack. They click on a link. It takes them to their video. It shows them a little YouTube video of, you know what, you're doing air squats for a minute. You're doing lunges. And they were able to pre-select or give us, the research team, this is what I like to do and what I don't like to do. So we're trying to meet people where they are, certainly in their homes, at their work environments. And then the only time they come into our laboratory is before and after to get their testing done.
I am very excited about this. You said meet people where they are. Typically, we don't do that.
No, we don't. And we can be very preachy. And, we've been accused of that. Clearly, some people can see the public health guidelines as being preachy. And I think there's been this notion of, well, if you're not meeting the guidelines, you're a failure, right? Like, and we know that most people aren't, right? So rather than, berate people for that, it's like say, hey, when you're starting to see the messaging change, right? Every little bit counts. So the role that we're trying to play is show some of the evidence for some of the biological, the physiological changes that can take place when people do these very small doses of exercise, and how do those relate to health-related metrics, right? We're not going to answer all the questions, and we're trying to collaborate with behavioral experts, because some people just discount HIIT out of hand, right? No one's going to do it. If exercise is vigorous, it's aversive, people deem it uncomfortable, it's a public health failure, it's never going to work. Well, number one, it's like, well, what we've been telling people to do largely for 40 or 50 years isn't working that well either. So I think we need to explore some options.
I love just the rebranding of it, of exercise. We do have an eating problem here in America and Canada. We're reframing this as exercise snacking. Just from a branding, it's just a lot more attractive to say, let's do an exercise snack versus HIIT or VO2 max or, whatever it might be. Like exercise snacking. Yeah, I like snacks. We like snacks here.
On that theme is the other thing we'll talk about, and again, not novel to us, we didn't coin it, is expanding the movement menu, right? And so just like people, no one wants to eat the same thing every day, or a few people do, when we say, okay, this is what a healthy diet looks like. We're not telling you can only eat this food or can't eat that food. Here's the things you should do to make your diet healthy. Well, if we apply that to physical activity, it's, hey, here's the things you should do. Here's your physical activity menu. You pick what you like. And not everyone likes the same thing on the same day. You might go through a period of time where I don't like that food. I don't like that exercise. That's okay. Vary it up, right? And so we're trying to, allow people, enable people to expand that movement menu and choose what they like and enjoy.
Well, I think it's very empowering. If there's anything we can do to support here, we're all for it. In closing, Is there anything we didn't touch on that you would like to discuss before we leave for today?
No, I've appreciated the opportunity to chat with you. I think we really hit on the big ones, right? And so in closing, actually, let me just finish that thought around the behavioral side of things. And so there is emerging and compelling research showing that, you know what? Some people like and enjoy this type of exercise. Some people like and enjoy the more vigorous stuff. And when you look at there's now systematic reviews, meta-analyses, which are trying to pull all these studies together. Depending on your view, it's either the news is either, well, it's just as good as moderate or just as bad, and that some people will choose to do it and others won't. And so that's why this idea of choose what you like and feel free to vary it up is best. And so in closing, I think my take home message would be a few minutes of daily vigorous physical activity, getting out of your comfort zone, maybe huffing and puffing a little bit, is a very effective health strategy. And look for ways to get uncomfortable once in a while throughout the day. Your body will thank you for it. Your mind will thank you for it. And I think you'll be a lot happier and healthier, 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Well, I am 100% in for the 1 minute hit 3 days a week. I will report back. And where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter at Gibala M, or at my website, martingibala.com, where I keep information on podcast interviews like this and some of our scientific research outputs.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Martin.
Thank you.